right, egg fans. Let's show those chickens they have not laid in vain.
I'll have mine scrambled.
All right, 2 scrambled working, baby. Do I hear fried, boiled, basted, or sunny side up? Jonathan, how'd you like your eggs?
In the shell. I hate eggs. I'll just have some crunchy crullers and a cup of coffee.
A former baseball player, a high-powered advertising executive, 2 kids, 1 house, and one question that sounded simple, but wasn't. Who's the boss? If you grew up watching Tony Micelli figure it out in Connecticut, hit subscribe for even more 80s classics, because this show was more groundbreaking than it gets credit for. It looked like a light 80s family sitcom, but underneath the laugh track, it was doing something television hadn't quite done before. It was flipping the American household upside down. Tonight, we separate fact from fable. When Who's the Boss premiered in 1984, most sitcom families followed a pattern. Dad works, mom stays home, and kids learn lessons. This show flipped it. Tony Micelli, widowed former MLB player, becomes a live-in housekeeper. Angela Bauer, divorced career-driven executive, is the breadwinner. That wasn't common in primetime. A fable of the time was the show was designed as feminist television, but the fact was it was designed as a character comedy, but it naturally challenged norms. The brilliance wasn't in speeches, it was in normalizing it. Tony cooked, cleaned, and did the laundry, and no one treated him like less of a man. That quiet shift mattered. Tony Danza wasn't your traditional leading man. He was a former boxer, former teacher, charismatic but not polished, and that's why he worked. Danza wasn't cast because of dramatic range. He was cast because audiences instantly liked him. He brought warmth, not ego, and his chemistry with Judith Light became the show's engine. Judith Light's Angela wasn't cold. She wasn't neglectful. She was ambitious, and that distinction was important. People thought Angela was written as uptight for contrast, but the fact was she was written as competent and occasionally insecure. The tension wasn't about dominance, it was about adjustment. 2 adults figuring out new roles. That nuance is why the show aged well. Catherine, Hellman's Mona, could have been a stereotype, but instead, she became a fan favourite, flirtatious, unfiltered, hilarious, and shockingly progressive for network TV. Fable, Mona was added for comic relief only. Fact, she often delivered the show's sharpest commentary. She bridged generations with humour, not lectures. Samantha and Jonathan weren't props. The show let them grow, especially Samantha, who evolved from sarcastic teen to independent adult. That growth mirrored the slow burn between Tony and Angela. And that slow burn? From the pilot episode, it was obvious. Tony and Angela had chemistry. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. The writers knew it. The audience knew it. So why did it take years? People thought the network forbade the romance, but in fact, the producers were afraid of the moonlighting curse. At the time, there was a belief in Hollywood that once the romantic tension resolves, the ratings drop. So, the show held back. Long looks, almost moments, arguments with subtext. They stretched it for seasons and it worked. The anticipation became part of the formula. The writers walked a tightrope. Too much flirting? You cheapen the dynamic. Too little? You frustrate viewers. So they leaned into emotional intimacy instead. Angela confided in Tony. Tony defended Angela. And they parented together. Their relationship wasn't romantic to start, but it was built first on mutual respect. That foundation made the eventual shift believable. When it finally happened, it felt earned, not forced. At its height, Who's the Boss was a top 10 show. Tony Danza became one of the most recognisable faces on television, and Judith Light earned critical praise. And the cast chemistry felt effortless, but success brought pressure. More episodes, higher expectations, creative fatigue, and the question lingered, when do you let them finally be together? When Tony and Angela finally crossed that line, it wasn't fireworks, it was quiet, measured, adult. If you wondered if ratings collapsed immediately, you'd be wrong. The fact was the show remained strong, but the tone shifted. Once the tension resolves, The story must evolve, and evolution is risky in sitcoms. The dynamic changed from will they to how do they? That's harder to write. Unlike many 80s shows, Who's the Boss was relatively calm behind the scenes. No explosive feuds, no tabloid meltdowns. Tony Danza and Judith Light maintained professional respect, and most interviews describe a supportive set. The real tension wasn't personal, it was creative. How long could the show stretch its central question? As the series progressed, Angela's career evolved. She wasn't reduced to romance, she remained ambitious, and that was deliberate. The romance didn't soften her character, and the writers avoided sacrificing her independence. That balance is why modern viewers often appreciate the show more now. It normalised a dynamic that's common today, but wasn't then.
Well, I did it. I finally discovered what those parking lot signs mean by severe tire damage.
Mother! What were you thinking? How could you back your car up over those spikes?
Angela, I didn't back my car up over those spikes. I backed your car up over those spikes.
Mother!
As Tony and Angela circled each other, Mona said what everyone was thinking. She teased, she pushed, she rolled her eyes at hesitation. Katherine Hellman's timing gave the show its comedic safety valve. When things got too sentimental, Mona snapped it back. By the late seasons, the kids were older. The premise felt less novel. The writers faced a decision: reset the formula or move forward. They chose forward, and that decision leads directly to the finale. After 8 seasons, the big question still lingered. Would Tony and Angela finally settle into something permanent? When the finale aired in 1992, it didn't explode. It didn't shock. It didn't even try to be dramatic. Instead, it chose something quieter. Tony leaves to pursue a new opportunity, and Angela realizes she doesn't want to lose him. They choose each other, not out of obligation, but clarity. The fact was, that was written intentionally small and personal. Some viewers expected fireworks. Instead, they got maturity, and that felt underwhelming to some and perfect to others. After years of slow burn tension, some audiences wanted spectacle. A wedding, a big declaration, a cinematic payoff. But Who's the Boss stayed true to itself. No grand gesture, no dramatic kiss in the rain. Just 2 adults choosing partnership. The writers didn't avoid commitment, they avoided cliché. The show always leaned into subtlety. Ending it with something explosive would have felt dishonest. What happened to the cast Tony Danza, who played Tony Micelli? After the show ended, Tony Danza continued acting in television and stage productions. He leaned into live theatre and even hosted his own talk show. What surprised many people? He also returned to teaching for a time, documenting the experience in a reality series. Some thought Danza never escaped the Tony Micelli image, but the fact is he embraced it while building a broader career. Judith Light, who played Angela Bauer, Judith, Light's post. Who's the Boss career may be the most impressive. She transitioned into serious drama, winning Tony Awards on Broadway, and earning critical acclaim in prestige television. If you thought she faded after sitcom fame, you'd be wrong. The fact was she arguably reached her career peak afterward. Angela Bauer was just one chapter. Katherine Hellman, who played Mona Robinson. Katherine Hellman remained a beloved character actress until her passing on the 23rd of February, 2019 from Alzheimer's disease. She carried Mona's charm into every role, and she often said Who's the Boss was one of her favourite experiences. Alyssa Milano, who played Samantha Micelli, grew up in front of America. From sarcastic teenager to young adult, Samantha Micelli evolved alongside the audience, and Milano handled that transition with surprising steadiness. Unlike many child stars of the era, she didn't disappear after Who's the Boss. She pivoted. Milano moved into film and television in the 1990s, becoming a recognisable face in teen dramas and later finding major success with Charmed, which ran for 8 seasons and introduced her to an entirely new generation of viewers. If you thought child stardom boxed her in, you'd be wrong. The fact was she successfully reinvented herself more than once. Beyond acting, Milano also became increasingly involved in advocacy and public causes, stepping into a more vocal role in the cultural conversation. Samantha may have grown up in Connecticut on screen, but Alyssa Milano grew into a career that stretched far beyond one sitcom. Danny Pintaro, who played Jonathan Bauer. His character, Jonathan Bauer, was the thoughtful centre of the household, observant, kind, often the quiet voice in the room. Danny Pintaro grew up on screen, and like many child actors, faced the complicated transition into adulthood after the series ended. He chose education over fame, attending Stanford University and stepping away from Hollywood's spotlight. Years later, Pintaro spoke openly about personal struggles, including addiction and his HIV diagnosis, not for headlines, but for honesty. His decision to share his story was measured and intentional, aimed at reducing stigma and encouraging conversation. Much like the show itself, his journey became less about performance and more about authenticity. Rewatch Who's the Boss Today and something stands out. It doesn't feel dated, not because of fashion, not because of jokes, because the core dynamic is now common. Women as primary earners, men in domestic roles, blended families navigating independence. In 1984, that was quietly bold. Today, it feels normal, and that's the mark of a show that influenced culture more than it advertised. The title was a question, and maybe the answer changed over time. At first glance, Angela had the money, and Tony ran the household. But real authority? It shifted between respect, compromise, and growth. Maybe that was the point. No one was the boss. They were partners, and for an 80s sitcom, that was quietly revolutionary. Who's the Boss didn't rely on scandal. It didn't shock audiences, and it didn't collapse under controversy. It simply told a story about two adults navigating new roles in a changing world. And sometimes, the quiet revolutions last the longest.